I think it would be a lovely time to go ahead and go under the skin of Fertile Void. So, we kickstart this conversation like we have many others in the past, in which we try to enter into an imaginary scenario. In the past, it's been a book that you find in a library or a movie that you find in a blockbuster, even though most of them don't exist anymore. Some people have, like Dane Evans of To the Grave, decided to reimagine the album cover and the album itself as a interpretive piece of graffiti on a random wall in some Sydney or Perth, Australia alley, right? Just a tag, like someone just tagged the entire album on a wall, and then it's up to you to figure out why they did that or what the story is behind it. So, if Fertile Void was a different creative medium other than an album, in the opinion of the two people in call acting as one, what creative medium would Fertile Void be instead of an album?
It will definitely be a book.
Okay.
It will definitely be a story of a book, and there's a whole explanation behind it, which also comes into play with the concept of the album. So unless you want to ask that later on, I can either go into it now or I can go into it later on.
Right, right. Absolutely. So of course then we have that book, and most likely it's just in a library just to keep things a little bit more sophisticated. Maybe the surroundings feel a little bit more safe because of it. Or maybe it's buried in the woods somewhere and you're on an adventure, you're on a quest, Indiana Jones style, because you're finding about bits and pieces of the Fertile Void, and you're like, what's the Fertile Void? What is this? And certain archaeologists are like, well, it's buried on the island of Malta under one of the graves of the great kings. And you're like, what the hell? Like, why am I going after this? Like, why am I going after the Fertile Void? That kind of sounds like just someone's corpse, really. But then you piece it together, and maybe the album cover, maybe that face kind of buried under vines and stuff is pretty self-explanatory. Maybe the book just kind of looks like a Bible, okay? But nonetheless, it's important for all books in the modern day and age, let alone back in the day, to have something on the back. So let's just say it's an old, kind of dusty, crusty leatherback book. It's buried under one of the great kings of Malta, one of the many famous people over there, just to kind of give it some oomph, right? Some legitimacy, some importance. Um, and then maybe it's buried and they have it like right here under their hands, and you have to like kind of lift their crunchy, bony hands and to get the book. But then maybe there's a note tucked into the hard book cover, and this is a summary. This is meant to explain and gently guide you into the contents of Fertile Void, just like we have summaries on the back of a book to introduce you to the narrative. If there was, like, what would be on this piece of kind of withered old note paper to explain the album and give a overarching thesis on what the album's about?
All right, so that's quite a very descriptive kind of way how to see it, and I love it. So to go into the main concept of what the album is and what the theme around the album is, I think the cover actually takes starts already pointing out a lot of features about what the theme of the album is. That's why we went down with the direction with that album. And primarily, there are two things in the album cover which are super important. It is, like you rightly mentioned, it is the face. There's a certain sense of anguish. There's a certain sense of pain and suffering in the features of the face, surrounded by the crown of thorns. And that crown of thorns is one of the very particular things that we wanted in our cover, because it represents a certain sense of circularity. And that crown itself is crucial to the track listing, to the story behind the album, the whole theme of the album. So this part I might carry on for quite a while. I'm just giving you a small warning.
You're good.
So the main concept of the album and the name of the album, Fertile Void, is a psychology context. It's a psychology context in itself. So me and Chris being primarily the one who carries out all the lyric duties, and I help and I give input as well in the lyrics. We were at a phase in our life where through our different journeys, through our different struggles, me and Chris had a couple of discussions and we realized that we were kind of like going through quite similar experiences in life. And it wasn't the easiest kind of phase in your life, but we realized over a coffee and a cigarette that like, fuck, we're at the same kind of similar point. What are we going to do about it? Without any kind of problems, I will admit that I was at a phase in my life where I was going through therapy, and the concept of Fertile Void actually came out from one of my therapy sessions. And I instantly kind of, it's difficult to say fell in love, but because it's not the easiest kind of thing. But I originally always liked the concept of the Fertile Void.
Intriguing.
Exactly, I found it intriguing. That's the correct word. Because it is a stage where you are in quite a bit of a vacuum, kind of. You don't know what direction you want to go in your life, or you don't know this particular example of, I don't know, this phase in your life. You don't know where you want to go with it. It can go in a million different directions, but the fact is, you don't know. And there are two ways how to see that kind of vacuum. It is either an opportunity for you to really go down the spiral and you can fucking spiral out of control with not knowing what direction you'll take. Or else it might actually be a very good opportunity for you to embrace that vacuum feeling, for you to actually start making a plan of action kind of on like, okay, I'm in this very uncomfortable phase. I want to do this, I want to do that, I will aim to do this, I will aim to achieve that in that way. So realistically speaking, it is a point in time where it's a very good occasion to actually grow from. And me and Chris were discussing this whole concept around it, and we instantly like were intrigued by it. And we decided to go with that as a concept, or the thematical kind of concept of the album. We went a step further as well, and so we took that Fertile Void and we actually researched the whole concept around it. It originally comes from what's called the contact cycle. This is all Gestalt psychotherapy. And the contact cycle is primarily, in theory, it's 8 steps which all go into a cycle. And here I make reference back to the Crown of Thorns, the whole circularity around it. And it, in very practical terms, it is just, it can be as close to something as mundane as possible to the most complex kind of task ever. So just to make kind of a bit of irony out of it, it might be just you going to work. So in the first step, it's you wake up and you say, I have to go to work. Then it goes to, I don't know, I have to start preparing, I have to go shower, I have to do this, blah, blah, blah. So there's the whole step around it. And the Fertile Void, which is one of the final steps, is, for example, the point where you got to work, you did what you aimed to do, you got to that point, and now what shall I do next? Right. It might be a very easy solution. It might be a very uncomfortable kind of solution. So we decided to go with that whole concept. Okay. Adding on to it, we did one extra step and we kind of crafted a whole story out of it, which consists of primarily 2 entities, which are what we call the apparition and the protagonist. So the protagonist is It can be me, it can be you, it can be anyone. Whoever wants to delve into the lyrics, whoever wants to kind of like assimilate that kind of body. And the apparition, which is the first song as well, it is this kind of entity which is speaking to yourself at the same time. So it's, you know, like it can be me and my thoughts, me and my other self. There's always this toing and froing, which is in reality it's quite normal because it's you with your own thoughts. And we wanted to create a story which is kind of like the protagonist having this constant toing and froing with the apparition and going through those different 8 to 10 phases of the contact cycle. Adding on to that, we kind of drafted a tentative kind of story where the protagonist, throughout the journey of the contact cycle, realizes that he comes to a point where he actually realizes that the apparition, basically him talking to himself. It's not a different entity. It's not something exterior to him. It's just him in his own world. And that's where the face of the cover as well comes in, because upon that realization, basically realized that he was facing himself. And he was facing himself in that whole circular contact. And the thorns, that's where they come in as well. He was facing himself in this kind of struggle and in this kind of situation. And then the last song, yeah, he's laughing because I warned you it might be long, but yeah. And so basically the last song then kind of ends on a positive note in the whole journey, however, with kind of like this cliffhanger which never gets resolved. And that was done on purpose because the aim is that you never complete one cycle and that's it. It's done. Once you complete the cycle, it's back to the next cycle.
I see.
So there's that kind of circularity, there's that continuous kind of aspect to it.
Yeah.
And that's where the cliffhanger comes in as well.
And why the song is called Death Spiral.
Exactly. The song is called That Spiral, which is the aim, exactly like Jack is saying, because one thing dies and you start over the spiral again.
Yeah. No, fair enough.
Good
Like, so you would say then that fertile void is meant to reflect upon the idea of cycles, eras, points in your life to where either you are truly at odds with an external force, or you're trying to manifest it as an external force, separate yourself from these conflicting points in your life, and instead you are creating a world, you're creating a fertile void for conflict within yourself in the name of self-reflection. After all, when you're in therapy and you are learning new things about yourself, you're trying to become a better person, a better version of yourself than you were yesterday. Naturally, when you're in therapy, sometimes it helps to construct a narrative where you and your issues are separate. You're trying to separate yourself from the apparition, or as humanity continues to do, as we continue to sophisticate ourselves yet enslave others or oppress others, depending on where you are in the world. You could be a king, you could be one of the Rothschilds, and your entire niche in life then is to oppress. But eventually, no matter if you're the world's greatest supervillain and you are one of the Rothschilds or BlackRock or Vanguard, or you're a globalist, or maybe you are on the other side of that. Maybe you are the oppressed. No matter what, there will always be a fertile void of thoughts, prayers, contradictions that almost obligate you, if you are sane and if you are accountable, to reflect within yourself. And at the end of the day, more often than not, all of our fertile voids, personally, end up being battles with ourselves, and we end up becoming our greatest enemy, our own greatest enemy. But most importantly, it's about finding out how many of those enemies, as they reincarnate, that you can conquer. How many of those apparitions that you can bring peace to and then send to the other side, as ghost hunters, paranormal investigators do these days anyway. The metaphor then to me, and as I'm interpreting it, of the apparition is phantom versions of you that you're trying to keep external from yourself, and therefore you're talking to phantoms, you're talking to ghosts that are meant to represent former incarnations of yourself, but really you're just trying to make peace in the fertile void in your own mind and navigate these psychscapes and do your best to help these former versions of you, these lesser pieces of lesser versions of you. You're trying to help them make peace, that way they can move on. And maybe if they are as complex as to being called the apparition, or if they are as complex as to becoming separate beings from you, well, you can't exactly hold them all within yourself anymore. So then you have to separate yourself from them, distinguish yourself, and just continue improving as a person. So, to attempt to compact all of what I just said, Fertile Void is meant to be the reflections of members of Hain from the island of Malta. It is meant to be a reflection of those members and certain parts in their life to where their inner complications, inner turmoil, inner conflicts became so complicated that it ended up being better to regard their inner turmoils as separate phantoms, and therefore we have the apparition and the protagonist. I think that's like the most I can compact that, but I like this so far. I like this. So then, in regards to that, you said the first track was quoted as the apparition. So let's go ahead and pull up the track listing, or at least I will over on my end. Let's see. And then, yeah, so we'd start out with track 1, the apparition. Of course, we understand that this is meant to be the antagonist, whether the viewer, the listener, the reader, I guess, for this book, wants to regard the apparition as separate from them or not. Well, the apparition is the antagonist. So, that's a very, very, it's meant to be interpreted. It's an interpretive narrative compacted into an album. But let's go ahead and attempt to get a little bit more personal with this, if you guys are open to it. And I say that by asking for you during the writing of this album, and then between you and the other member, I do believe you said Chris, you guys were having very similar inner turmoils happening at the time. So for you personally, Claudio, at the time of writing your own version of this and having your own interpretation of this album then, of the Fertile Void, who at the time was the apparition for you?
The apparition for me, so first off, I really want to congratulate you on how you interpreted the whole concept. Well done. A really good rendition of what we were saying. For me, the apparition was basically when the whole concept was starting, like I had explained, was just this a bit wiser version of myself. Okay. Like, you know how I don't know, it's like when you're going through something which particularly destabilizes you, you know, it's like these cartoons when you have the small good angel and the little devil on the side.
Yeah.
Which in reality are all different aspects of you. To me, it was the wiser version of myself um, trying to guide me on what makes sense the most on how to tackle any of my issues which I was tackling at that point in time, or anything which I was going through that time, which, you know, like subconsciously you're aware that I might be fucking up a bit over here, but let's see how things go. And that little kind of voice inside your head which tells you like, dude, you're really not in a good place to actually tackle this issue, for example, right now. So to me, the apparition was actually that voice which was always kind of like telling me, maybe this is not the best solution for the time being, or maybe this is not the best course of action on how you tackle an issue. So to me, that was the apparition.
Fair enough. Okay. And one thing I would like to do too, and to introduce, because this was not exactly in the emailed questionnaire, but this is meant to improve the substance and the quality of these Under the Skin sessions going forward. If you're able to, and of course we can edit accordingly if we have to take some time for you to pull up things, but song by song too, what I would love for you to do personally, being that you are navigating us through your interpretation and your version of Fertile Void, I would love for you to take out then a chunk of lyrics in the song that you think best fits, not only for the overall surface level meaning of the apparition, but for yourself and for your interpretation whilst you were writing this. So if you want to, that would be fantastic, because I think what's really nice, you know, and from a marketing standpoint, is like, well, if you were to make an apparition shirt, quote, like what lyrics would you put in gold foil lettering possibly on the back of the shirt? You know, MySpace deathcore style.
Very get some merch.
There you go. And most importantly too, whilst we're navigating through, Claudio, your interpretation and your application of Fertile Void, I want us to go ahead and do this for every song in the track listing. And I think then that people will be able to understand how this album then, that's meant to be interpreted by so many, and then told and analyzed in different ways, how you ended up navigating through this and utilized Fertile Void to reflect between yourself and this wiser version of yourself. After all, my understanding getting into it was that this was meant to be solely in regards to lesser, maybe less productive versions of yourself. So I like the fact that for you, it was actually talking with a younger, maybe more seasoned version of yourself that was more confident in the timeline and in the moments that they were residing in. Very fascinating that you ended up then reflecting with the apparition, and the apparition was just a wiser version of yourself. I was like, whoa, that's a cool plot twist there. So for you then, in the apparition, what would be the most applicable lyric, if there are any, to you beginning to reflect with this wiser version of yourself?
Alright, so I actually, in the meantime, I pulled up one of the lyrics, which I know that Chris and like I said, we were discussing this between us. We kind of made the apparition have a very specific voice in the lyrics, where it kind of like properly appears. And keep in mind as well, like I was saying, the apparition, the way, at least the way I always understood it, is this kind of internal conflict with another version of myself, kind of. And so if you go through the lyrics of Insentient, which is the second song, it starts off automatically with a quote, which is the apparition talking to the protagonist.
Okay.
And the first lyric, in fact, is, "This place inside your mind is your test, your way out is still out of sight." So it's that kind of like self-doubting voice, but purposefully so. Like, listen, you're not in a good shape right now. And the aim would be to make you aware that you're not in a good place, for example, and you need to actually work on it. Later on, throughout the lyrics of Insentient, then we have a whole chunk where the apparition is directly talking to the protagonist. And the lyrics are so: can you face this wasteland that is your mind? There is no other way out. Embrace the chaos and step into the abyss. In the emptiness you will find the path, fraught with violent despair. Inhale the brimstone and become one with the flame. Gaze upon me and rise again. Just something small which I can already point out was the wordplay with the gaze upon me and rise again. Because that is where it automatically kind of does that mirror effect.
Yeah.
So it's not gaze upon you or gaze upon it or whatever. It's gaze upon me because I am reflecting where you are at. I am reflecting how you are feeling. So that specific lyric, I was always very in love with it because it is the point also in the cycle, for example, it is the point where it's one of the cycle steps, it's recognition. So it is the recognition of what you are facing and what you are kind of in the path of starting to plan how to act upon it.
Foreshadowing.
Exactly. There is a sense of foreshadowing, and it puts the picture as well into what needs to be done at this point. So it is the recognition or the awareness that this is the current situation, this is what you have to face, let's go at it.
Fair enough. I like that. And yeah, it seems that you're just kind of navigating us through these tracks on your own. I'm not really having to say track 2 Insentient. So that's pretty cool. Now, one thing I did want to ask them about Insentient, being that Insentient seems to be about recognition, and like having that looking in the mirror moment with yourself, and you're like, oh, I thought the apparition was separate from me. Turns out it's just a wiser version of me. Aside from that, then, what was the reason that you decided to work with Andreas Bojovir as the feature for this track?
It's a bit of a more hardcore driven inspiration when it comes to the riffs of the song. You know, it's a bit more groovy, a bit more party-like, which would fit Kabal's writing style. But when we talked to him, as in we're very good friends with Kabal and with Andreas, we asked him if he would like to actually feature on a part of the song, which is not what he usually does. And he was up for it, you know, because he got to experiment some new techniques with some new patterns, not always, you know, the fast rapping. So we just told him, listen, we like your voice, we want something different that's gonna really stand out on the track, which is totally different from Chris. You have all the liberty, here are the lyrics, do whatever you want with it. So, and he enjoyed it as well, because it was I remember him telling us it was a bit more, say, challenging, because it was a specific section which he's not totally used to in terms of the rhythm of the song.
I see. Awesome. And sometimes it ends up being a more casual thing. I know that me personally, when it comes to features and collaborations, my intention being that there's money to be invested, right, would be not only to have like, ooh, this guy from Cabal, a really, really cool heavy band otherwise that has their own style, mixing Thal and various other subgenres of heavy music. They're just doing something really special, so we wanted to work with them. We've been friends with them for a long time. But for me, I kind of want to take the next step and up, like, not to look down upon anyone who's done collaborations a certain way so far, but like, I think it'll be really, really fun to not only get certain musicians to collaborate on certain songs, but to like incorporate fictional depictions of them in the art, do collaboratory merch drops and stuff. So for example, Insentient with Andreas from Cabal, like the Cabal logo, Hain, Cabal, Hain, Cabal, Hain, and then having like not only that face that we see already on Fertile Void, but maybe a reversed and inverted white static noise, just like a whole bunch of different noise to really turn it into something else. You're looking at yourself. This person's looking at themselves, but it definitely is a different thing. Adding some purple to that as per the album cover, and then boom, Insentient as a long sleeve or something like that. So and that's definitely something that I'm trying to do in the near future. The next song that we're writing is going to be a collaboratory effort. We have yet to figure out who's going to be featuring on it, but for whomever does feature on it, not only do we have the intention of getting them on, but like I look forward to filming a drastically different environment, music video wise, from what we're doing for the rest of the video. For example, if it's Derek Connolly and Mythful, having him film a little excerpt of what looks like him in hell, and he's like representing Satan, and as per the context of the song, he's like, whoa, you know, I, the adversary, the enemy of God, even find an issue with this. And, you know, he guides you through that, but then he makes references to his other albums and stuff. I look forward to doing that, and that's just like one example. But, awesome. So, we move forward then in the track listing with a song that you guys have made a music video for. This was one of two that you would make a music video for, or some type of visualizer over on your YouTube channel for. The song, track 3, would be Blood Moon. So, we kind of dive then into, thus far, some uncharted territory as far as context. What is the surface level meaning for Blood Moon?
So Blood Moon in particular, it's kind of like it still goes along with the concept of awareness, which is still linked to insentient in the stage of the cycle. So the theme here is Chris actually had a very particular theme, which is the Dark Night of the Soul, not night like the Dark Knight of Batman. It's the evening night.
Yeah.
So it was that particular stage which describes a period of time during one's life, kind of where like everything seems hopeless. So the protagonist just had this discussion with the apparition, but is still in so much shock and is still in so much kind of like the early stages of awareness that everything seems fucking hopeless. Knows that the future is kind of still quite perilous, and he realizes that this is just the beginning kind of the journey. So it's the beginning of him taking action on what he needs to take action on. And as one of the lyrics stand in the song itself, now the picture is finally clearer, and he needs to act. So that was the concept behind Blood Moon.
Okay, cool.
Which is the third track.
Yeah. And then as far as quoting any lyrics specifically, what would you think is the best lyric stanza to quote when you're trying to, like, say, same thing, you know, merch, you're making merch for it, you're like, what's a line that stands out? What would be that line?
And in fact, it's the one that we actually used for our long sleeve, which we have on sale right now. So part of the whole visual of the merch, it has this specific lyric, which is, I reign supreme inside this hell, I'm in denial, I'm in distress, it's all in my head, it's all in my mind, I'm but a mortal here, I am no god in disguise. Which if you remember from the song, it's the part where there is that like more polyrhythmic kind of section where the song quiets down a bit.
Yeah, hell yeah, okay. Sweet. Track 4 then would be Absolution. this is like something that's very confident of itself and requires that title. What's going on with this one?
So Absolution, and also as the track itself, like sonically kind of emits, it's a bit of a, in very huge inverted commas, it has a bit of a more happier kind of feeling. So, and that is because this is the next step in the cycle. It is the step which is known as mobilization. So basically this is where the protagonist has finally, metaphorically speaking, has actually started to run and started to take action on finding a way out of his own mind, kind of, let's put it like that.
Okay.
So it kind of represents the still traumatizing effects from where you were at upon you realize where you're at, but in a positive kind of way, in a slightly positive kind of way, you start actually taking action and start the journey of the whole cycle itself.
Okay.
In fact, part of the lyrics, Chris says a couple of times where he says, move faster, I need to get out of my mind. And crushed by the world. And the concept is that, so you realize where you're at, you started to take action on it, so you need to move faster. You need to move faster so you actually achieve what your ultimate aim is to achieve. And there is that kind of a bit of a better feeling because you finally are acting upon what you wanted to act upon. So, you know, it's like that self-sustaining positive approach.
Okay. Sweet. And then what is a good lyric to quote for this song?
So it's the one I just mentioned. So basically, there's the chorus itself. The ending of the chorus goes, move faster. I need to keep moving while I'm crushed by the world. Which actually represents that I realize where I'm at. I am actually working on it. I need to move faster despite all the problems and despite everything that is trying to push me down. I need to keep moving.
Sweet. Track 5 then would be Hindrance. This seems to be kind of contradicting to the confidence that was in Absolution, the upbringingness, the positivity. So what's going on with Hindrance? What changes?
Yeah, and even like again, so from the audio part, Hindrance is a different song. It's a bit of a sadder, a bit more morose kind of feeling song.
It's a downer.
With exactly, it's a slightly downer, and it actually quite represents where I was at with my life at that point in time. But it has those very heavy elements in it as well. So in context, and it's a very realistic way to understand a course of action as well. You know how at sometimes you actually start working on something, on a problem or whatever it may be. At first there is all that enthusiasm where you're like, fuck yes, I'm finally doing something about it. And like in the early to mid phases of that course of action, something fucks you up.
Post-plant clarity.
Exactly. And that is what this song is about. It takes on the approach of action in the contact cycle. So you're kind of like engaging with the whole process, experimenting with the whole process, and following the events of where the previous song was at, trying to find a way out of his own mind, out of his own problems, out of his own struggles. This is where he starts to think about a plan on what he has to do, but finds all those problematics which take you just a bit, you know, like that whole process of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And as much as you're still doing 1 step forward, that 1 step back kind of like fucks you up, man. And that is what this song kind of embodies.
I see. Okay. And if we have yet to quote lyrics from the song that are meant to stand out, which ones would?
So in this case, in this particular song, there is one lyric that I genuinely love, because it embodies in this struggle, in this phase, the discussion between the protagonist and the apparition. So while I'm going through this problem, I ask my own apparition, kind of, and the lyric goes like this. Long have I been lost in shadows, my mind has been torn in two, trapped in this world of despair, I need you to guide me through. Which it actually goes to show, like, I'm having these issues, I'm having these troubles, I'm trying to work on them, fucking help me out here. Which is a very kind of honest interaction that anyone has with himself through any kind of difficult situation. And that's it.
Sweet. All right. Now, the song that would then introduce me to Hain. I still have a video tucked away. It's just, working subway and having to board ride there, board ride back. Dealing with life recently, I haven't been able to get to uploading it. But that's kind of where the front to back session comes in as far as I'm concerned. We have The Lake featuring Ben Dorr. So, what is the purpose behind this song? What is the surface level purpose?
So this song is a very particular one in the whole track listing as well, because this song actually embodies the contact part of the contact cycle. The contact, it's where you're kind of open for engagement, where like meetings take place, kind of, and exactly, and the track is titled "The Lake" specifically because upon this whole journey, upon this whole course of action, Lake embodies a part where in this journey the protagonist actually sees his own reflection in a lake. Upon seeing his reflection, he realizes that everything that he's been searching for throughout this whole journey, in reality, was a reflection of himself. It's a very abstract kind of concept, but the way we wanted to portray it was that upon reflecting upon himself, he realizes that these troubles I've been having, these issues I've been going through, are all a reflection of what I am going through, of what I need to do. And that kind of like blurred line between reality and fantasy, kind of like, it's where you actually realize that shit, this is me that I've been dealing with, kind of. And that's what is embodied in the song in reality.
Sweet. Yeah, and of course, Ben Dorr is as talented as a vocalist as he is. His reputation, whether in Hollow Prophet or Shadow of Intent, has reigned supreme for a great many years now. Many people look back to either the Scum Prophet EP between him and when Dickie Allen was first starting on Scumfuck. He's a fantastic vocalist. And I'm sure that very similar to these other connections that you've made with bands that we've had on the show and bands that we have yet to host on the show, but through opportunities in the UK or Europe on tour, I'm sure you guys have met a lot of different folks, and maybe Ben Dorr is one of them. I know I would love to have the pleasure of meeting him in person myself. But to not toot his own horn, or toot his horn. That took me a second.
Okay.
Too much, right? What was the reason you guys ended up deciding to have Ben Dorr dump?
I think this
Jump on
ties
this
as well with what... Excuse me?
What was the reason you had him jump on this track?
I think it's a similar reason why we wanted Andreas on the track, because when listening to a feature, at least from my experience, it can either be that the sounds so similar to your own vocalist that you can't really tell apart who's who, and it doesn't actually shine through, or it's so different that it doesn't really make sense with the song. It's like, alright, they just got a feature, for you it sounds great, but it's too different. And I think with both Andreas and especially with Ben, there was the opportunity to find the middle ground in having a feature where both vocalists, and in this case Ben, will shine through his own, but it's not as totally different it sounds weird, or it sounds like I don't really know how to explain it, but I think I got the point across.
There is the similarity between what you are doing yourself, however it still stands out as something which is contrasting to what you're doing within the same concept of the whole track.
I like that. Okay, cool.
And we actually chose Ben as well for the song in particular because it is a bit more of a kind of like deathcore with some symphonic elements kind of song. We wanted to have a track like that. Ben fits perfectly in that kind of vibe as well. And to anticipate one of your questions, we actually reserved the highlights of the lyrics specifically for the part that Ben was going to be singing, which is the reflection that I was just discussing. In fact, the lyrics that Ben sings go something along these lines. In the depths of the lake, our souls become one. As we dive deeper, the water surrounding in its icy claws in this place, I'm no longer alone. For the shape I pursued has been myself all along. This is what I was searching for to become whole again. Which exactly explains the whole concept of the mirror, the reflection upon the lake. He noticed that he's battling his own self. And same thing like Jack was explaining with what happened with Andreas. We told him like, listen, we have these lyrics, feel free to change things around as you wish. We just have this concept that we would like. You have absolute liberty on what kind of vocal range you want to use, whether highs, whether lows, whether a mix-up of everything. And he just came out, presented us with this belter of a vocal track.
Well, technically we got something else in the beginning.
Yes, that's true. I have to stay hush about that. Because we had, by mistake, we had received future unreleased material, which then once it got released, he was doing another vocal track with another band. And when we received it, we're like, that's fucking killer. But he sent it by mistake. And then he sent us our actual files.
This doesn't sound like pain.
And we were confused when we received them. We were like, wait, but something is way too long in the lyrics.
It was just the stems, so there was no...
Exactly.
It was just the vocal stems.
And then we finally got it.
Okay.
So he fully delivered. He fully delivered us with what he gave us as well, just as much as Andreas, and we're super thankful and lucky to have him featuring on our album.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I really like, and I'm not sure if you guys kind of pinpointed this detail out, but like, not only did Ben Durr work really, really well as the feature for this song, but the lake in and of itself and talking about a mirror reflection actually unintentionally makes reference to their best album of all time, Melancholy, because that's the album cover. I love that.
Yep. We figured this out at a later point, if I'm being honest. I remember me and Jack having a conversation once in my balcony, and we're like, Lake, Ben Durr, Pain, our song, Melancholy.
Yeah.
And we just got to that point and like, yeah, it works perfect.
Mm-hmm. No, I like that. It's almost, it's almost as if far away in a distant land, that being Malta, it's almost as if the album cover of Melancholy was like being interpreted and told in a different way, but like it just makes, in my opinion, it just makes that album more relevant. I really think that even up until now, Melancholy is probably the best album that Shadows Intent ever writes, period. I really hope that they plan to embrace those roots going into the near future, but hey, we'll see. So, the next track we got is The Symbiote. And this is not exactly a character or an interpretation that has been explained before, I don't think. Unless, of course, the symbiote is meant to be a different way of explaining the protagonist. I'm not sure, but of course, Claudio, you'll be navigating me through this. So, what is the surface level understanding? What should simple brains understand about the symbiote?
So the concept of the symbiote reflects the next step in the whole cycle, which is completion. There's a sense of satisfaction and completion, or kind of like subsiding of energy in itself. As the word symbiote or symbiosis means, and as we just reflected upon the lake, we had the protagonist had an image, had a vision, had the reflection of himself. So the only course of action at this point in time is where the protagonist actually embraces and engulfs his own image. The scope of that is in order to complete the whole process of acceptance. So he actually stumbled upon his own reflection, found out a number of things about himself upon facing that reflection. Now he completely eats up that whole thing, makes it a part of himself, and uses that as his own strength, as his own tool to continue throughout the journey, which is symbiosis in itself.
Right.
And that's why the song was ultimately called Symbiote within the whole concept of the album.
Right. No, I like that. And really, it's the healthier part of the process. It's the point in time where you're like, you know what? This wiser version of myself, and for you, Claudio, personally, this is where you come to the realization that this wiser version of yourself isn't here to look down upon you, but to help you look towards a more productive and better future, and to become closer, maybe, to that wiser version of yourself. One could even say, I would dare argue, that in this narrative, that the wiser version of yourself could be from the future. And instead, you still look at it. You look to this wiser version of yourself as a phantom, as a ghost, something that's haunting you, but not because of history, because of the future instead. And oftentimes, I would say, not many of us really look to ghosts and phantoms as something of our future, but Christmas Carol, that's a pretty good example. The ghost of Christmas past, present, and future help Scrooge then become just a decent person, not even like a better version of himself, but a decent person, because then before that, within most interpretations of that narrative, of that story, well, he's just greedy, he's selfish, but he's also lonely, so that's why he lashes out in selfishness and in greed. So then, when I think of ambition and I daydream about the future, I've never personally had the experience of regarding my future self as a phantom, but maybe sometimes that's what you need to do. Maybe you need to be haunted by the potential future, by your potential futures. However, do not concern yourself and base the future off of what ifs. At least more paranoid, more panicked, more stressed what ifs. Instead, because the future is so uncertain, I think the most productive way then to reflect and discuss things with a wiser version of yourself is to just regard them as guardians instead of phantoms and ghosts. Unless, of course, you're just a bad person, and then you have some time. You need to take some time, look within yourself, and figure out if your future is going to be of dread, of torment, of pain, of suffering for you and others that deserve your respect and that you care about. For me, when it comes to thinking about the future, though, most importantly, don't base the future off of what ifs. Just figure out what you have the power to do now to make your future more prosperous. That way, for lack of a better term, just an analogy, you don't have to settle for crumbs. And as the term goes for me personally, always appreciate, never settle. Always appreciate the opportunities that come along the way. Appreciate the opportunities to learn, or maybe the more physical manifestations. Maybe a new job, a new friendship, a new relationship. Always appreciate the opportunities, but never settle. Don't compromise. If you truly feel within yourself that you are compromising on certain things, you need to figure out what you can do to compromise less. Because there are, after all, billions of us here on the planet now, all across the world. Whether it be personal connections, relationships, job opportunities, whatever it may be. You don't have to settle. But do not forget to appreciate the moment. Be in the present. Modernize your soul. Because if you don't, you're going to be stuck either in the past and infinitely circulating, right? As Fertile Void depicts, you'll be infinitely circulating and reflecting and kind of just worrying yourself with what's already happened in the past, or you're going to be constantly chasing after the dragon, as the analogy goes, as the saying goes. You're going to be chasing the dragon until you realize that the dragon was actually yourself.
You the whole concept, I'm happy about that.
Yeah. So then symbiosis entails, and whether it be in Marvel Comics or whatever, symbiosis is that good old handshake and deciding, you know what, you're not looking down upon me, you're not being condescending, you don't see me as a lesser version of you yourself, despite me being the more physical, more concrete version of myself, as Claudio's depiction or interpretation of Fertile Void goes. But instead, you're like, you know what? Be my teacher. Let me be my teacher and be in the present, but also make sure that in the future, do my best, do everything in my power to ensure that my future is a little bit more secure. What would be a good lyric to pluck from the symbiote regarding, maybe more specifically, this handshake, this, we should work together between you and your wiser self?
Oh, the best to represent that is the first set of lyrics in the song, when they go out like quite heavily, the lyrics, where Chris says, "Accept this fate, I'm my own reflection now, broken and weak, yet somehow complete." I think that's those two lines perfectly embrace that, like you're saying, that handshake, the self-awareness that there are parts of me which are maybe incomplete, there are parts of me which are weaker than others, but somehow having accepted this whole situation, having accepted my own reflection, having accepted my own past, having accepted my own weaknesses, I now feel more complete to actually take on the rest of the journey.
Hell yeah. And that's all that matters, is when you reach that consensus of being more confident in your future and you feel that you can navigate these certain conversations and these reflections with less panic and more confidence, that is when you are on the right track in life. Next track then would be Twisted Monuments. if I may, I think what I'm gonna do with this one and like for the rest of the track listing is attempt to theorize upon surface level understanding with these words. So after you and your wiser self have this handshake, you get into that sense of symbiosis. You're working together now. Twisted Monuments, to me, it's kind of like you and your wiser self are looking upon the things that you used to worship and understanding their flaws. Or maybe the things that you used to love and you're understanding their flaws, you're acknowledging it, and you're like, yeah, I mean, ruins are ruins. There are ruins all over the world. And for you and Jack, like, there are not ruined archetypes and structures of architecture. Maybe not in Malta. Malta seems to be pretty sturdy, standing still. Of course, there are more ancient structures there that have been there for centuries now. But most importantly, they're not ruins yet. But there are other places in the world who aren't so lucky. There are other places and destinations in the world, like the Great Pyramid of Giza or the Sphinx over in Egypt, that weren't so lucky. That's kind of my understanding of this so far. Let's see if I need to be corrected.
You pretty much ruined my next step because it's very, very, very close. Fucking done. Twisted Monuments, it represents the stage of withdrawal in the contact cycle. Withdrawal, there's a sense of letting go. There's some sort of like, there's a bit less of an investment into what was before.
Okay.
Which I like your analogy how you understood it. So, in the context of the track itself, the traveler, the protagonist over here, is actually in the phase where, having gone through symbiosis, he starts to withdraw and let go of those bad memories that were affecting him so negatively. So this is one of the steps almost closing that cycle, and he is realizing that he is almost getting to the completion of the phase. So the fact that he embraced his own self puts him in a position where he starts thinking like, those were really bad situations, were really bad memories. They still are bad situations and they still are bad memories. However, I can now start to compartmentalize sort of in the fact that yes, these are bad memories, these are bad experiences, but that's where they were at, that's what I have gone through, and I'm at a better position or at a better place to actually get to the completion of this whole journey. And that is the context and the concept of this song. And once again, I applaud you for your interpretation of the track with just the title, because you got it right. I'm happy that you're getting the whole world.
Yeah, man, and that's the beautiful thing is when substance emerges onto the table with lyrical depth. And like it's pretty easy for me to decipher these things. I don't take too much pride in it because there are moments where I'm like absolutely wrong, and it's better to prefer to be wrong than to be like, oh yeah, I fucking know what I'm talking about. Like, it's rewarding. It's mutually rewarding. So, we got 2 tracks left on Fertile Void. And now, my favorite part, or one of my favorite parts, in deciding the track listing, right, is deciding to smack a title track onto the album. So, we got the title track. Fertile Void. Now, this song isn't at the tail end of the album. It's not at the beginning. It's not even really in the middle. It's near the end. So, there was obviously there was strategy. There was strategy with that, I'm sure. What was the strategy? What was the reasoning that this ended up becoming the second to last song?
So, the strategy behind it just happened quite naturally due to the fact of the whole contact cycle itself. So like I had explained before, the whole team around the album, when in one of my sessions I had heard about this fertile void, me being a musician, an artist, call it what you may, I obviously liked this concept of fertile void, and I actually started researching it, looking into it, having a proper understanding of it. Which made me realize that the fertile void is not the last step in the cycle itself, but it was one of the steps in the cycle which I personally resonated with a lot, because I have to admit that I struggled in that part of the cycle. It was a concept which to me it was so difficult, so unpleasant, the whole element of uncertainty. It put me in a position where I was very uncomfortable there.
Right.
However, given the fact that it's not the last step of the cycle, it's interesting. So that was the whole strategy around it. I have to admit, I was quite adamant on the fact that I would like the album to be titled The Fertile Void, and luckily for me, the rest of the guys were quite
Fertile void.
Fertile Void.
Yeah, it's one of the main arguments we had.
But I was lucky enough that the rest of the guys embraced the whole concept. We worked out instantly, and so this time round, for example, to explain the lyrics and the context of the song, I already explained what the fertile void is. So
Yes.
that's pretty much it,
Yeah.
reality, in the context of the journey. But there is a sense of equilibrium, sort of, in the whole fertile void itself. It's a very unstable equilibrium, as weird as that might be.
No,
That's the whole concept of it. It's this uncertainty to render you certain.
there you go. Simple enough. All right, and then the last track we have is Death Spiral. Now, you did talk about this song before, and really Death Spiral, from what I understood at the very beginning, was a little bit more casual, and it's the haunting premise, despite the apparition that you're already talking with, that you're already going through this fertile void with. Death Spiral is the very, very panicking, very stress-inducing, depending on your perspective, premise that this isn't the end. This is just the beginning of a more critical medium of self-reflection. That's how I understood it. Like, this is not the end. This is just the beginning. But the thing is, you can use the fertile void almost as like a pocket dimension, a space in your psyche that you can go to. This ends up being better than prescription meds, in my opinion, because there's only so much that prescription meds can do unless you are drastically chemically imbalanced and you need medication, right? Otherwise, you have creations that help you navigate through these scenarios, and the fertile void just happens to be one of them. I don't know if I hit it on the I don't know if I hit the nail on the head per se.
I have nothing to add. That's it. It's it's the last part. It's the last part of the cycle, which is the beginning of a new cycle, and that's how we intended it to be, the song, because that's it. It's closure, re-beginning, and the cycle starts again.
There you go.
And we actually just another detail I might add is what we did sonically with the song as well. When you listen to the album and you listen to the song, which is that spiral, we actually had a journey inside the journey itself, also sonically, where the album actually finishes off by instrument, always one instrument less in the song. So at first you have everything going on at once, including like lead guitars, and then one guitar, the rhythm guitars are out, and then the lead guitar is out, then the vocals are out, and then the bass is out, ending up with just one final ride hit from the drummer.
There you go.
And that was the whole concept as well, which kind of like represents the cycle ending up until completion, just to rehash everything again.
There you go. Cool. All right. Well, then continuing upon more or less the tail end of the Under the Skin session for Fertile Void, the debut full-length album from a band tucked away in the Mediterranean Sea on the island of Malta. After listening to this album and after providing lyrical dissection, and then on top of that, as per a continuing to adjust formula with the questionnaire, right? We ended up discussing bands that were important to the DNA of making this band, let alone the album, what it is and what it was. So, then reflecting upon this album, it's out now, it's been out for some time as 2025 continues to blossom and wake up and spring approaches for the Western Hemisphere. When you think about this album, what distinguishes it from other iconic records that would end up inspiring it along the way?
I wouldn't know how to answer that. I don't think the word is how would Fertile would distinguish itself, but sort of like pays an homage to all our influences. As in, we've all been listening to music for some time, we've all been playing our instruments for some time and investing both our time and passion into it, so it's more of a connecting the puzzle pieces together and paying homage to what inspires us rather than what distinguishes us from the rest.
There you
I
go.
think it's also, when it comes to being able to distinguish yourself, so subjective. What I might, listen to a band that I find it distinguishing the rest of scene. It can be different for you, it can be different for Claudio. It's all subjective at the end of the day. At least how I see it.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Yeah, Claudio, do you have any other commentary for that one?
No, I agree with Jack in the sense that it was never a name of distinguishing ourselves intrinsically. Kind of like we didn't want this album to be fuck you all, this is us.
Right.
We do that with integrity of what you're putting out there, kind of the way at least the way I see it. We wanted to represent our journey, we wanted to represent our artistic influences and our artistic expression in this format
So the best way we can.
as best as our capabilities can. We're happy to have worked with the people that have helped us in achieving that as well, and we hope that it continues to be well received.
Right. There you go. Cool. So then, that would be the Under the Skin session. Boop.